Carlos, welcome back to the show.
Jay, thank you so much for having me back on the show.
So what's really cool is you're the first person to now have been on Building a Business That Lasts twice. But we got some really exciting new things to talk about, so I'm so glad you're here.
It's great to be here, and I've got to say it's such an honor to be a two-time guest on the show. As soon as we're done recording here, I'm going to go on LinkedIn and update my LinkedIn profile.
Awesome. So we got to talk about the biggest thing that you've got coming up, right? You got a brand new book coming out, your first book, and the title is The End of Marketing, which is, I love the title. I love the cover. As soon as I saw it, I was like, man, that is so good. I wish that had been my idea, but it wasn't. And the subtitle is Humanizing Your Brand in the Age of Social Media. I just could not believe this is more relevant. I've not read it yet, but I already pre-ordered it. It's in my Amazon, whenever it comes out, it's coming to me, so I can't wait to read it. What I'd like to start with, though, before we get into the details of the book, is what was writing a book like? Because a lot of people out there may be thinking, I'd like to write a book. I've thought about it, but it's different to think about something and actually execute against it. So tell us about that journey a little bit.
Man, so I'm so glad that you asked about the journey, because a lot of folks, just in general, I think in the business world, like to focus on the outcome of things. So I would love to sit here and talk about how the book already has become a bestseller on Amazon, but I think that wouldn't do any justice to the process that went into writing this piece. So to take a few steps back, I've been wanting to write a book for years. So, you know me, Jay, I've worked in this industry now for the better part of a decade. I've worked for some really cool brands as the head of social media, and I've seen a lot of colleagues in the marketing space write books throughout this time. And I'll be frank with you, I shopped around some different ideas to publishers over the last several years. I didn't get anywhere. My pitches were turned down, and I attribute that really to not being ready for the process. Because it's a process, mentally, emotionally, physically. And it wasn't until last year on the day of my birthday in August, I woke up and literally it's the morning of my birthday, and I said, I am going to write a book in the next year. And I sat at my dining room table. I wrote what became the outline or the syllabus to the end of marketing. And I sat there and thought for a moment, all right, I do keynotes on basically a weekly basis. Like, what are the key items in my talks that really resonate with the audience? What are the key items that marketers today need the most help with? And quite frankly, how do I write a book that is not just another social media marketing self-help book? I wanted to create something that is going to have some elasticity to it. I wanted to be able to create a book that's also going to be kind of edgy. And the name The End of Marketing just immediately came to me. Like, marketing as we know it is dead. And what is marketing nowadays? And that's like one of the things I bring readers through this journey throughout the book. Like, I don't tell them in chapter 1, you literally have to read all the way until the very last line of chapter 12, the final chapter, for me to put it all together. And I don't want to spoil it for you or for anyone that's reading, but marketing is a lot of things. It's sales, it's PR, it's communications. So going forward with this process, I put myself in this mindset of I am going to write a book that is going to change lives and it will change careers. And the book's timeline, it brings readers from where we're at today, so assuming it's 2019, 2020, and where marketing is going over the next decade. So kind of fast forward through some of the fine details, Jay, I started writing this book right after the holidays. So I started writing it in January. And one of my mentors and advisors, Brian Solis, who wrote the foreword to The End of Marketing, he told me 3 years ago when I started going down this process of entertaining writing a book, he said, you will have to sacrifice your weekends. And that will be time away from your family, time that you spend literally locked up in a room writing. And he was absolutely right. I spent the months of January, February, March, and all the way up until April 30th, with my manuscript being due on May 1st. I spent every single Saturday and Sunday in this office where you see me right now writing. And there was times where I'd be at a conference and some ideas would come to mind, and I'd run back to my room and I'd start, kind of adding some things to a chapter. And it was just this process. I don't know how to describe it and put it into words other than there's something in me that changed. Like, a lot of the book is me teaching people, but part of it is also like recounting parts of my life, parts of my career. I made it very personal. I love storytelling, which is something that shows in the content I create online. So I wanted for any time someone pick up this book, even if they've never seen a piece of my content before, for them to feel like a human connection to me, which again, like no pun intended, like the subtitle of the book is Humanizing Your Brand in the Age of Social Media and AI. So the humanization piece isn't just through content, it's not just through marketing, but it's by every single piece of content that any one of us as personal brands or business brands create, we should be forming those human connections. So again, it was a process. I was really relieved, to be honest with you, when I was done writing, because when I was done writing, then it became go time to start with the marketing and sales of the book, which I think, quite frankly, is the best part of it all.
Well, that's what you do, isn't it? I mean, getting the attention, having the conversations around it. I think it's interesting. Something like a book requires so much discipline. And I know when I wrote mine, I kind of set very specific deadlines of what I had to get done. And it was like some parts were easier than I thought they were going to be, and some of them were harder than they thought. But just to kind of recap, I was taking some notes as you spoke there, and I was trying to kind of summarize some of those key elements. And the first one I wrote down was commit to it. You kind of woke up and were like, all right, I'm going to do this thing. And the other one I wrote down was start now. You sat down immediately and said, I'm going to put some pen to paper. Also, it makes it interesting as you wake up and you come up with that idea. I think that happens to us so often, and we don't execute against it. We're driving in the car, maybe not doing else, and an idea comes to us. We don't do anything with it. We get out of the shower and we're thinking about something. We don't do anything with it. We wake up. I mean, one of the big ideas with workshops here that we've been doing lately came after I was having a nap on a Sunday afternoon. But then when I woke up, I picked up pen and paper and wrote it down. So I put commit to it, start now, and then you leveraged your past experience, right? You're not just writing about whatever. These are things you've actually done. And I think in our industry, especially as marketers, there's a lot of, I don't want to use the word charlatans, but I will. There's a lot of people out there talking a big game. They have never actually executed any of these things. And the thing with you is you've actually done it. So you've leveraged your past experience. You had a big vision, and then you just did it.
You see, like, that's the thing that I will say, like, just to be very like humble and transparent about it. I think if I would have written a book 3 years ago, you would have had people that say like, all right, this Carlos Gil guy is totally fronting. And like that's the key to a book. Like anyone can put ideas down on paper. Anyone can teach. But what I say, what sets teachers apart from leaders is, do you have the qualifications? Like what qualifies anyone to teach? Like I could have said at 19 years old I wanted to be a motivational speaker and marketing coach, but at 19 years old, who am I going to motivate besides maybe some people in my own peer group or maybe a few years younger than me? Like that's just a reality. So like looking back on this, I had to go through trials and tribulations in my career, even in my life, just to be able to get to a point where I can teach people based on the path I've walked, based on the research I've done, based on experience. So like, yes, you're right. There are a lot of people, whether it's the marketing industry or just any industry, that like they walk around like they are bigger than what they really are. But then once you start to like peel the layers of the onion, they really don't have the qualifications. And, you know, that's one thing I really wanted to ensure, that like anyone can pick up my book. They can call me out on things. And it's like, all right, I'm ready.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing too, though, I think it's also easy. Like, I mean, we've both been doing this marketing stuff for a long time. I've been doing this since I was 17 years old, really since I was 12, but I've been in business for 20 years. So like, but even with that, there were times when I was writing my own book that I was like, oh, am I good enough to do this? Like, is anybody actually going to listen to me? Like, and it's easy to have that own self-doubt too. So I think you can fall off either edge of the cliff. You can be totally unprepared to teach, or you can actually be prepared, but have that kind of internal doubt voice. I mean, I feel like you got to punch that little guy in the face and tell him, look, I'm moving forward anyway. And that's what you've done here with this. So
but here's the thing about doubt though, that I want to like interject there. Like, if you are doubting yourself, it's for a reason. Like people call it imposter syndrome. There's other people that say you should fake it till you make it. Like, I think at the end of the day, you need to be honest with yourself. If you yourself feel like you are ready to take that leap in your career and go that next level, take the leap, because you are telling yourself that you're ready and you will succeed. Like no one is ever going to come to you and say like, Jay, you are ready to write a book. Jay, you are ready to acquire a company. Like no one's ever going to say that to you in order for you to say like, all right, now maybe I should do it. That voice from within, you should listen to it. So if you have any doubt, listen to that doubt. Trust your instinct. Trust your intuition, because there's a reason why that voice is speaking to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting perspective. I think it just depends on the person sometimes too, though, right? Like we all have. I think the one thing we can say for sure is that self-awareness is like a huge superpower, and being able to understand like where you really are, and then kind of leverage that has a lot of power. Because I think a lot of times that's the big weakness. People don't. They either way overvalue themselves, they way undervalue themselves. They don't have a clear vision. They don't even really know what their strengths and weaknesses are sometimes. And I found for me, like learning where my strengths really are, that's had a huge impact in going, okay, this is something I'm not good at. I need somebody else to help take care of those things. And I need to focus on where I really am good. What I'd love to hear about now, though, is like, let's talk about content of the book a little bit. And obviously, we won't give away too much. We want people to go buy the book and read it. But, end of marketing, humanizing your brand. Talk about that idea of humanizing your brand a little bit. What does that mean practically for people? And how are people getting it wrong?
So here's the thing. Social media and the internet, Jay, undoubtedly has become a really noisy ecosystem. I refer to social media as a noisy digital ecosystem, or this giant digital ocean. Like, I use that metaphor a lot. And what it really means at the end of the day is that if you want to rise above the noise that's being created, and I'll throw some of the figures out there. Facebook has over 2 billion users. Instagram has over 1 billion users. Twitter has over 300 million. LinkedIn has over 600 million. Like, these are great platforms for relationship building, for marketing, connectivity, you name it. But in order for you to stand out on any one of these platforms, you need to figure out a way to form connections with people. And you don't do that by talking about your latest sale. You don't talk about, your logo is just a logo. Your company name is just a company name. So many people want to blame the algorithms. They want to blame the fact that it's pay to play. Like, yeah, I get it. These entities are businesses. So like chapter 1 is breaking down the very basics of all of this. Is you are trying to grow a business on top of someone else's business.
Yeah, that's right.
You need to understand that what you are trying to do requires an investment of time, an investment of capital, an investment of people. That's one. 2 is, who are the people today, or who are the entities, the brands that are gaining the most reach and making the most noise? They're people. They're not corporate entities. Like, without people, there is no social media that exists. So in order for a corporate entity to even scratch the surface and rise above that noise, they need to implement the same strategies and same methodologies that you or me or any other content creator or celebrity or influencer implement. And the strategy is real simple. Be human, be real, be relatable. So I walk readers through this journey throughout the book of examples of corporate entities, corporate brands that are successful in doing just that. I use Wendy's as an example because I think that they really set the standard for how a brand should conduct as a brand on social media, which is having a personality. Granted, sometimes it can be a little brash. I refer to social media as the wild, wild west. But it resonates with people. They understand pop culture. They speak in a way that doesn't sound like a Target or a Walmart speaking to you. They're not telling you that Tide is on sale on aisle 2. No, instead they're having conversations with their constituents online and with the fans and followers of their competition. So, early on in the book, it's setting the standard for, as a corporation, you need to understand that the internet is noisy. You're not just competing against corporate entities and corporate brands. You're competing against people. You're competing against me. You're competing against the DJ Khaled's and Kim Kardashians of the world. Now, the good news is that you actually have some resources at your disposal. One, you can leverage your human capital internally, so you can leverage your employees and make them the faces of your brand. And you can leverage social media for social listening to identify, who's speaking about your brand, who's already creating content on behalf of your company, and then just use these mediums to form a relationship with them. So by the end of this book, what I'm hopeful that any marketing executive or social media marketer or brand exec or small business starts to do is they realize, all right, we need to stop putting our logo in front of every user. And instead, we need to start putting human faces in front of social media users.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. I mean, I saw some of the work that you have collaborated with Hertz on, and it created this like story in this environment. You go, hey, I kind of relate to this guy. He's traveling a lot, and he's doing speaking engagements, and he's willing to speak for this company, but you don't do it in a way of like, come rent this car. You know, it's about telling a story and like showing an example. Like, here's real life. Like, I just showed up at the airport. You know, gosh, I've been traveling all night. Now I'm here. I got to get to somewhere else. I need quick service. And creating those types of engagements that companies do, and Wendy's is a great example, really does humanize it and makes it feel like a totally different experience than the example of buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff.
Even like the Wendy's example, we will get to a point in time where people will start to naturally to want to know, well, who's behind Wendy's account? Because we already have these conversations in marketing circles. And that's kind of where things begin in marketing circles and they start cascading out to, just the general market. So with that being said, even Wendy's at one point will have to step from behind the digital curtain. And, a big part of the book and every chapter throughout it is there's an element of storytelling involved. So the way I structured this book is first of all, and I've shared this in some smaller circles, this is the first time I'll say publicly, the way I structured this book is that each chapter is a keynote. So I looked at this as, all right, I'm going to teach people throughout each one of these chapters. I know I have to write between 6,000 to 7,000 words, which is a lot. So let me structure this like a keynote. So chapter 3, for example, which I'm talking about, and I use the Wendy's example, is all about community management, how to become better at listening to what's being said about your brand, your competition, and your industry, and how to be what I refer to as a digital savage. So Wendy's being an example of a digital savage. They really don't care who they offend. Social media is the wild, wild west. And there's no restrictions. There's no law that says like Wendy's can't go after Burger King or McDonald's. Like there's no law that says that like you as an agency can't engage with like other agency clients. Like it is what it is. There's this just open space that you can engage from within. So in this chapter, I use the comparisons to pro wrestling. And like that's the story leading into how to be a digital savage, where I share, like growing up as a kid, I was a huge pro wrestling fan. And as I became older, I realized that pro wrestling was scripted. It's fake. Well, guess what? Consumers today are looking at social media no different than pro wrestling. It's scripted business theater. So I'll repeat that again. Social media marketing is scripted business theater. When you sit in a boardroom and you're writing out social media posts a week or 2 weeks in advance for a client, what you're doing is you are essentially scripting out what they are going to say every day for the next 2 weeks on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. And users nowadays have realized, well, this is scripted business theater. You're not a real entity. There's someone behind this brand. Well, who's that person? I don't want to have the relationship with the logo. I want to have a relationship with the person behind the logo.
Yeah, no, I think that's super interesting. It's going to be really cool to see how that stuff shapes out over the next couple of years. And I think that a lot of people are going to miss the boat, honestly. There's a lot of people that are so far behind already for where we are, and they're talking about trying to get to where we are. And what you're talking about is going, hey, what does this look like a year from now, 5 years from now? Like, where are we going? Because ultimately, as a company, that's the most important. Because if you're just driving to where we are, by the time you get there, everybody else is already gone, I think that's where a lot of people are going to end up.
And to that point, like I use examples of like the Circuit Cities and Sears and Toys R Us of the world. These corporate entities, these corporate retail giants at one point were, in every shopping mall, on every street corner throughout America. And now they're virtually non-existent, with the exception of a few Sears stores that you might see. But the same principles apply on social media. If you do not evolve, your brand will cease to exist digitally speaking. When people are no longer speaking about your brand on social media, then you need to start recognizing there's a reason why people aren't speaking about you and touting you and shouting you out. It's because you did a really poor job in the entry level years of social media building a relationship with the general population.
Yeah, it's going to be, there's going to be some blood in the water, for lack of a better term, with people that aren't taking those ideas to heart. One thing I'd love to hit on is, you got a lot going on, right? You've got kids that you care about. You've got a speaking career where you're all over the world. You got this new book that you've just finished writing, and now you're working on marketing and selling. So there's a lot of stuff going on. You got partnerships with corporations. You got private workshops, public events, all these things, right? And it's easy to get in the midst of that. And some people go, oh, I wish I had that problem. But it is a real issue. And so for everybody out there who's trying to struggle with those priorities, what are you doing right now that you're having to go, hey, I'm having to adjust these things because, there's just a lot more going on than there used to be. What is your priorities look like? How do you figure it all out?
Well, you know what? First of all, that's a great question, Jay. As a business person, I always try to keep my plate full because, as you know, running a business yourself, cash flow is king, and you need to keep cash flow coming in order to keep paying your employees and literally keep the lights on. So prioritizing what is important and what's going to generate revenue ultimately is what comes first. As you very well know, I've had to back out of some different events throughout this year. I've really had to dwindle down some of my commitments to where I am not overloading myself. I know going into a month that I typically had to book even things like this podcast a month out in advance. I had to book meetings out a month or 2 months out in advance because you're right. If I'm not on a plane going to speak somewhere, I'm on site with a client meeting with them, and there's deliverables and there's work that has to be performed. And that's even impacted some of my social media activity as well. Now, I'll say this, over the last year, I've become a lot better at outsourcing some different tasks. I know that you and I have had some conversations offline about executive assistants and the value that those bring, but I've just had to really learn how to, one, prioritize my time, prioritize what is a nice to have versus what's a must have. I know that there's clients that pay my company, Gil Media Co., every single month, and there's deliverables that we have to perform before I ever do a podcast interview, before I ever go out and step on stage. That is priority because that's what keeps my employees employed, and that's what keeps my business running. The book, I have a book deal. So I have an obligation to my partners here, being Kogan Page Publishing, to get a book out by an X amount of time. So then they have a product for them to catalog and sell. So again, for any entrepreneur out there that's like me and wants to have their plate full, I would suggest that you proceed with caution because you might get to a point that you overextend yourself. And I know I've been guilty of that, and I've had to very quickly learn how to pivot, how to have some very difficult conversations when you can't come through on something that you initially signed up to do. And it comes down to really prioritizing, what are the 1 or 2 activities that you absolutely should take on versus the other 8 or 9, which you can probably come back around to at some point. And again, for me, I knew as this year started to move forward, the agency, it's really important I continue to grow that. The speaking career, it's important that I grow that because I know that helps amplify book sales. But at the same time, without the book, then you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. So even with speaking engagements, I've had to be a lot more selective of what I get involved in. And, I don't know if it's cool for me to talk about this or not, but, there's events that have been, free, events that I haven't been compensated for that I've had to back out of. Because again, it comes down to a time commitment thing. If I'm getting on a plane from Los Angeles and flying across the country, that's a day of travel. It's a day in market. It's a day back. Those are 3 days I'm away from my business. Those are 3 days that I'm not able to write my book. So It's really just been a balancing act, man. And I'm not going to say it's been easy because it hasn't. But I think that is where any and every entrepreneur goes through this maturity period, where you have to start prioritizing, outsourcing, and really start thinking about the long term because you can't get burnt out in the first quarter.
Yeah, I think those things are huge. A couple of things that really resonated there to me. One is having that 1 or 2 things that are the biggest priority. Matter of fact, every Monday morning, our team has a team meeting, all team meeting. We're still small enough. There's 16 of us that we can go around the table and say, hey, the one thing I have to get done this week is this. And then the next week we go, hey, did you do the one thing last week that you said you had to do? And there's other things that have to get done. But I think that idea of going, hey, what's the one thing I have to do? And knowing why that is, because it's propelling you towards a particular purpose, which might be keeping the lights on, is extremely important. The idea of being willing to outsource or build a team, maybe in unique ways, because there's certain things that you really need to have somebody like right next to you physically on that maybe is an actual employee. But there's a lot of other things nowadays. I actually had a guy, John Jonas, who runs onlinejobs.ph. They're a Philippines outsource company, and he was on the podcast not that long ago. Some amazing ideas of being able to give somebody else in another country a full-time job at way less expensive than what it would cost here, but you're helping them out and they're helping you out, and you're able to keep that cyclical engine going of, especially when you talk about recurring work or retainer work, anything like that, partnership stuff, you got to be able to deliver. And then the last one that you kind of talked about, which I think is so important to just double down on, is it's okay to say no. Like sometimes you got to have those tough conversations of, gosh, this is just not the best use of my time. I'm going to have to back out of this. Or an offer comes in to do something and you really want to do it maybe, or you want to help or whatever, but it's just, you have to be willing to say no. Somebody told me one time, when you say no, when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to 1,000 others. And so people that don't like to say no, they got to learn that when they say yes to this one event over here, there's 1,000 other things they could have been doing. There's a major opportunity cost. And that's what you're working through and we're all working through to kind of figure out next steps on.
Yeah, like, and I love that you asked that question, Jay, because again, we talked about the voices in your head, right, earlier at the beginning of this recording. Like, those are things that I, have struggled with. Is, sometimes I'm bashful to say no because there are opportunities that I don't want to disappoint people. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to partner and collaborate, but there's only so many hours in the day. And I even say, again, kind of going back to the book, like, you can't be everywhere and be great. And I've learned that the more I take on, the less I can be great and devote to the projects I really want to be a part of. To your point about, like, you say yes to something and then, you're saying no to others. So, with that, I would also caution any entrepreneurs or people listening, like, have a very clear vision of what you want to do over just the next 12 months. Like, I'm a big fan of planning for the long term, but like also I'm a big proponent of short-term goals. So like for me going to this year, writing a book was a short-term goal. Mm-hmm. And check off some of those short-term goals, even if it's one or two things a year, because trust me, like this whole journey, it's called a journey for a reason. Yeah. You don't accomplish your lifelong goals in 1 or 2 years. I'm writing a book, my 11th year in the social media marketing industry, which some might say, like, gosh, that's really ancient. But you know what, Jay? I'm getting ready to be 36 years old. I started doing this at 25. I was a lot younger then. I'm older now. Like, I like and I'm comfortable with where I'm at because I had that experience that I didn't once have. So it's all perspective. And I'd say, again, like, if you have a lot of smaller goals, those all will add up and take you to your long-term lifeline goals.
Yeah, there's a great book that I just read called Atomic Habits by a guy named James Clear. And he talks a lot about these like micro kind of achievements, basically. And it made a lot of sense to me because it was like we always focus on these big things. And we should have big, kind of hairy, audacious goals, as Jim Collins puts it. But I think that thing of like, hey, what can I do today that's like a big thing to check off that's going to lead me to maybe that book this year or something? And that might be a giant goal for somebody else. But I think having those short-term and even daily like goal, what's the one thing I got to get done today? It just helps you build like a little bit of momentum versus, take somebody like Gary Vee who's like, I want to buy the jets. I really honestly believe he actually wants to buy the jets. And I'm kind of convinced at this point he probably will at some point, as big as of a goal as that is. But in the meantime, he's got all these other things that he's kind of checking the box on along the way. I think we've all got to move towards that. One thing I wanted to hit on, because it kind of relates to goals and priorities and like just mixing life together a little bit. Lately on your Instagram account, I've seen you with your older son a lot more. He's been kind of traveling around with you. So I thought it was cool to see you blend kind of work and regular family life together. And he's out there watching you at shows, maybe even recording you on stage. What was that like, kind of toting him around a little bit and letting him kind of see behind the scenes of what you do for work?
It was cool. I think it was an awesome experience for the both of us, for he and I. It's no secret that, my son is from a previous relationship, my first marriage. He lives in Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm pretty transparent when I go back and forth and visit. People see him on my story quite a bit. But this is the first summer that he spends with me here in Los Angeles. And again, it goes back to priorities. Like, the work doesn't stop just because it's summer break for an 8th grader.
Right.
Like the work continues. Like,
Right.
and again, as a business professional and parent, I can say like, all right, I'm going to take the summer off as well. But again, it goes back to prioritization. So I brought him with me to Denver for a conference called Digital Summit. And I really wanted Carlos, his name's Carlos III. I really wanted Carlos to see what it is that I do for a living. Because it's one thing to see me create content on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing to actually be there in person and see that it's not just when dad goes on stage. That's one aspect. What I really wanted him to see was all the interactions that I have to do when I'm in market. Like I've been to Denver many times for business and for leisure. I would have loved to have taken my son to do like all the amazing things there is to do in Denver. But the reality, Jay, is it was a 48-hour business trip. It was literally, got off a plane. It was really late at night. So he got to experience what it's like getting on a plane at midnight in LA and flying somewhere. And he was like all tired. I'm like, dude, this is like how it goes. Like you're experiencing what I legitimately do. And he's like, it's really lonely here at the airport, Dad. I'm like, now you get to see what it's like when I'm by myself and you're not here. And it's a really lonely life as an entrepreneur. And we got into our hotel at like 4 a.m. And that's something that I've done many times. And like he started going through those motions of like, you get in at 4 a.m., but you're up at 8. And you're going to the convention center, you're networking. And I literally brought him along for the ride for everything. And again, what I really wanted him to see was not so much me on stage speaking to an audience. I wanted him to see those interactions, the people I speak to after I get off the stage, the people I interact with that are colleagues of mine when we go out to dinner, when we go out to lunch, like when we're interacting at the conference. So I think those are the things that will resonate with him the most when he hears me tell him about the value of networking and knowing people. Like, we were standing on a street corner and someone walked up and was like, hey, you're Carlos Gil. Like, I follow you online. You should come with me, like, and like my colleagues out to lunch. And he's like, well, Dad, like, how do you know that guy? I'm like, I don't. He knows me. So like, that's when kids realize all the sacrifice that we have to make as parents, all the hours that we have to work, all the things that we have to do to provide for them. They actually get to see it in person. And it was a priceless experience. And quite frankly, I would love to do more of that with my kids.
Well, I love that you did it. I really enjoyed following along and watching the stories. It was just neat to kind of see him, you know, young and bright-eyed watching you do what you do and get to see all that behind the scenes footage. Because even as transparent as plenty of us want to be or try to be through Insta stories or whatever else, it's never the full picture. It just can't be. There's especially when things really get tangled up and you don't have time to record a video. You might record like a post-op of a debrief of what happened when something went crazy, but you can't always experience it unless you're actually there. And when you're dealing with travel, you know, you never know what flight's going to do or anything else. There's so many things that can come up. And I think it's really cool that you did that with him because he can get also kind of a vision of like what hard work actually looks like versus like just what happens to show online. And that is really
cool. It's funny because like you mentioned flights, like leaving Denver, we almost missed our flight. We were like literally within 30 seconds of them closing the gate on us. You know, just kind of sidebar conversation. We're in Denver. We're having some dinner with colleagues after the conference. And like, I'm one of these guys that when I'm in market, I like to stretch the clock as far as I possibly can because like we love social media. We live by all these means. But there's nothing that replaces face-to-face interaction. And I love those moments where I'm having a meal with colleagues of mine and the phone's off and I'm really not paying attention to time. And then I realize like, oh my gosh, my flight leaves in an hour. It's like a 40-minute Uber ride and get to the airport. I'm going to be cutting this very close. And he got to experience that and, you know, running from one gate to the next and going through all that rigmarole. And again, like, it was priceless because he got to see what his dad does, and it wasn't documented. I didn't have anyone filming that.
Right.
But it's those moments that we just share between us as father and son that we will always, you know, forever have in our memory.
Well, it's really cool you did that. There's great value. It really made me want to take my kids along. I've not taken any of mine to speaking engagements or big business travel trips like that, and I kind of wanted to. I think I always think about like fun travel trips. But I think it would be really cool for them to kind of come along for that work stuff too and get a feel for it. We're running out of time, which is unfortunate because I feel like we could talk all day. And I really enjoyed the insight that you've shared. I think it's going to be really valuable for other people thinking about maybe writing their own book or just thinking about marketing as a whole. So as we wrap up and you're thinking about talking to another business owner, and this could be a corporation, somebody who's in a corporate office trying to make some decisions, or it could be a small business owner who's trying to figure out this whole social media thing. Like, what's that kind of key advice? They're standing next to you. They are in that little, moment at a stoplight where you're, or a sidewalk, you're sitting talking and you're saying, hey, here's the one thing I want you to take away. What do you want to share with them as we wrap up the show?
Yeah, I would say, Jay, the best advice I could give to anyone, regardless of where they're at in their career, is the best investment that you can make is in yourself, and that's in your brand. So regardless if you work within a corporation, regardless if you own your own company, and regardless of where you sit, professionally speaking, making an investment in yourself is a long-term investment that you will never go wrong in. And I know that sounds kind of selfish because, I've got employees, you have employees, and I remember working at companies where the leadership would even question like my own intent because they would see me growing my brand on their company dime. And honestly, that was by design because I knew I'm not always going to be at this organization. Who knows you, I call it a 401k account. And I don't know if I talked about that on the previous podcast that we did, but I'll just say it real quick. Like, I would not be where I'm at in my career today if it wasn't for me investing in relationships. And the way I look at every relationship in life is like a giant 401k account. I know Jay Owen. The value of my relationship with Jay Owen is priceless. But that relationship started by me just meeting you, Jay, and us over time growing the relationship. And if you do that enough times and people get to know who you are and see that you're a good person and you are a giver with a servant mindset, people will start giving back to you. 2 weeks ago on a Friday morning, I received a phone call out of the blue from someone who runs marketing for a very big corporation. And they said to me, hey, I got your name from this person. She said so many good things about you. What are your rates? How can we start working with you? Jay, I kid you not, I had a contract by Monday morning from $1 billion corporation that recently went public.
Wow.
That is the value of when you invest in yourself and honestly invest in others too. So you can't go wrong by investing in relationships. Like, we can all create products that could fail or succeed. We can all create businesses that fail or succeed. I've made bad decisions throughout my career that haven't always panned out, but those relationships are always going to be there, provided that you feed into those relationships and give as much value. And I know it sounds really cliche, but I really don't know how else to put it. So again, best advice is invest in yourself and invest in the relationships that you keep.
I love that. And I think that the reality is social media is just a tool. Depending on the platform, it's just a series of tools to build relationships and to be a person connecting to other people that you actually care about, who you actually want to see them succeed. And I think if you do that, if we all do that, one, we're going to live in a lot better world. And two, we'll end up being successful. It may take some time. None of these things pop up overnight, but long-term, consistent activity of caring for other people and being a good person towards other people has real value.
And case in point, one thing to throw in there, kind of bringing everything full circle about the power of relationships and just doing good for others. Again, in the book, I walk readers through this journey. And the very last chapter, chapter 12, the way I open it up is I write about how the person reading Then to Marketing got to Carlos Gil. How did you get to me throughout this book? And I talk about how for years I pitched myself as an aspiring author and I was turned down left and right. One day, a colleague of mine by the name of Michael Brito starts messaging me on Facebook Messenger. If you recall, being a Jaguars fan, Jaguars were playing the Patriots AFC Championship game. And that was now a couple of years ago. He messages me about the Jags. He's a San Francisco 49ers fan. He's we're going back and forth. And I asked him, how's life? And he's like, great, I just published my latest book. And that led into a conversation, which then led to Michael introducing me to his publisher, Kogan Page Publishing. I sat on that introduction from January of, it was 2018, to August of last year, 2018. But the point I'm trying to make here, Jay, is that I probably wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you a few months out from publishing a book if it wasn't for an introduction that came from someone that I've now known for years that happened to randomly ping me on a Sunday afternoon while I was watching football.
I love it.
That's power relationships.
That's right. Power relationships, power networking. It's just different tools to use it with. It's been so awesome to have you on the show for the second time. I'm really excited for your book to come out. I hope everybody goes out and buys a copy, buy truckloads of copies, and give them to all your people. If you want to find out more about Carlos's book, you can find it at endofmarketingbook.com. And just search Carlos Gil. You'll find him on Instagram, Facebook, anywhere else that you're on the internet. He's there and has some great content that rolls out all the time. So go grab his book, endofmarketingbook.com, or you can just go get it on Amazon. Carlos, thank you so much for being on Building a Business That Lasts once again. Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.